So this will be a good introduction because it will be a little bit conceptual, but then we'll dive into the very much like how it's done. I'll show you how those are created, how they're managed, how you can see that history, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Introduction to myself. So I am Matt. We are with Swift Solutions. We are a SOLIDWORKS reseller in the area, and I come from a SOLIDWORKS mechanical design background, but also have data management experience with SOLIDWORKS PDM, and then transition my focus over into the 3D Experience PLM capabilities. So I have a strong background in these capabilities as well. Now, what we'll be talking about today, we'll start with just a quick overview of revisions to make sure that we're all on the same page, understanding, using the same language. Then we'll dive into how you can create a revision and view that revision history with the Cloud PLM capabilities. Then I did want to touch on how that differs between your drawings and your 3D CAD as well. Very similar process, but just understanding how those references work between each other. I'm going to touch on how revision tables can be driven with the Cloud PLM capabilities. I won't focus too much time on revisions versus branches versus iterations, but these are three terminologies you may hear and capabilities that serve different purposes. So I want to ensure that you have familiarity with what they are for and how they can be used. And then I will touch on, I won't focus a ton of time on the last section considering the crowd, but there are settings that are important. If you do get started, where they're available for you to configure your experience with how it behaves. So I'll touch on those as well. So from a quick, just conceptual standpoint, when I'm talking about a revision, we're talking about a formal marker of change in a product. And ultimately that's going to be used for you to be able to communicate which version of that design is approved, in work, being manufactured, what you should be manufacturing, et cetera. Ultimately, with a good revision process, you're going to have clarity among your team, you're going to trust what you're manufacturing, and you're also going to have a lot more control, preventing things from the wrong revision being manufactured or the wrong part altogether. So another thing that I did want to touch on, there is conversations of when does it make sense to use revisions versus when should I just create a whole new part number altogether. So ultimately, if you're able to exchange what you previously had, it's fitting the same fit, form, function, then that's a use case where you can revise or should revise that part. Whereas if it's totally new fit, form, function, there's probably an opportunity where you're just creating a new part number altogether and you don't necessarily need a revision tool for that situation. But there is benefits to having a system to manage your part numbers as well, which I won't be touching on today, but the same platform can manage your part numbers as well. Now, we're coming from a SOLIDWORKS background. So what are some of the things that SOLIDWORKS users and teams are commonly running into? Ambiguity about what is current. I know that it is a very common scenario. We're talking to organizations where if people are doing it their own ways, one person might label it with final, V2, V3, but there's no real system to understand, is this truly the latest or not? So that's a huge hurdle with which a proper revisioning system can solve. File-based workarounds, how do people manage revisions without a system that's built to do it? It's often file save as, and it's creating a new copy of that file or creating a folder where there's a different revision of that somewhere. And often we do see people put revisions in the file names. That can be a huge danger as you get into file references breaking, having to update those can be a huge time suck as well. So having a system that handles the revision but doesn't mess with the file names is also very beneficial in terms of the stability and efficiency in which you can work. Drawing and model alignment, understanding references, SOLIDWORKS references can be, it's very logic based, but if you don't understand what's happening, you can easily reference the wrong revision of something in a drawing because it was open and then you open the drawing and then it pulled the wrong reference in and you didn't understand that and then you saved it and it updated that reference to a different file. If you don't have a system that's built to understand which revision, which piece of data this is referenced in this drawing, you can mess that up, ultimately leading to the wrong part being manufactured. Limited visibility beyond engineering. It's very important that not only the engineering team has a strong understanding, you need to have the manufacturing team, the purchasing team, they need to have an understanding of what should be purchased, what should be built, and having a system that tells them what's the latest without having to have tribal knowledge of having designed the part is very important as well. And then the last point here that we commonly see is just scaling. It's manageable. You can do a file save as, you can do within the revision name as a small team. You're able to keep really close control on, I was the one that saved that, I remember where it is, what's the latest. But as soon as your team starts to build and scale, having a system that can build with it is also critical. So these are some of the things that, just as you're thinking about, how do I do revisions today? Should I be even using a system that manages my revisions? These are the types of things that having a good revision process and a system to facilitate them helps solve. So I'm kind of rehashing what I was just talking about. It solves those problems by going and using a system that's built to manage those revisions. So in terms of what we'll be talking today, I'll be just doing a little bit of a role play here scenario in which we have this crank set for a bike. We're getting customer feedback where we're having consistent breakage. So ultimately there needs to be a change in that crank. That is not a whole new part that will be coming in. It's a change to an existing part fitting the same fit, form, function, but enhancing the performance of it. So in this case, we need to go through and manage that via an additional revision. So let's go ahead and talk about how we create revisions. So I'm going to break this up when I'm talking about things in 3D Experience from a SOLIDWORKS user's perspective or a non-SOLIDWORKS user's perspective. There's usually, just like in SOLIDWORKS, you can do something 3 different ways. There's often a workflow where you can do it in SOLIDWORKS or you can do it in the web portal side of things. I'll touch on both. As a SOLIDWORKS designer, you obviously have to have SOLIDWORKS to carry out the SOLIDWORKS side of the workflow. But the benefit of seeing it outside of SOLIDWORKS is you can do that either as a SOLIDWORKS user, or you can think of somebody else on your team also coming in and being able to manage the lifecycle without having to be a direct SOLIDWORKS designer, if you give them that access to do so. So just from a high level, I'm going to start off with just some step-by-steps here. If anybody would like some of these steps following, just so that they're more in a written format, and then I'll dive into showing you how it's done live. But ultimately, in 3D Experience, when you're working in SOLIDWORKS, there's a task pane along the right side. Once your data is saved into the platform, and when I say saved into the platform, that's saved into that data management system. It now has initial revision, and you can create additional revisions on top of that. By opening up that task pane, you can right-click on the part you'd like to create that new revision of, and then select New Revision. Ultimately, down at the bottom toolbar, there is also a New Revision command as well. Now, just a couple of notes before I dive into the live walkthrough of this functionality. The revisions of assemblies will maintain the reference of which revision was used of that component within that assembly. So if revision B of the assembly uses a component at revision B, but at revision A of the assembly, that component was at revision A, it will remember that. So if you go back to revision A of that assembly, it will pull that component revision A back as well. So it maintains the reference of which revision was used in this revision of the assembly of all the components within it. This same logic carries over to drawings. So the drawing will remember which revision of this part assembly on here was used when I'm at this revision of the drawing. And then only one revision of a part can be cached locally. So when I say cached, when you're working off of the cloud PLM, the file is still locally on your hard drive while you're working on it in SOLIDWORKS. SOLIDWORKS needs it on your hard drive. So it's cached in a folder on your hard drive, and then you save it to the cloud storage. It can only have one revision on your local hard drive at a time. So in that sense, you can't have an assembly that references this instance is at revision A and this instance is at revision B. It will always be at the same revision throughout the assembly. So most people want that anyway, but just in case some people have brought that question up. Technically, on the 3D Experience side, it can maintain different revisions at different instances, but SOLIDWORKS can't handle that reference. So as soon as you open in SOLIDWORKS, it will throw the same one throughout all instances. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up SOLIDWORKS here. And we have this component here and this assembly here. And ultimately, it was this crank that was having that strength issue that we needed to make some changes to. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just, right-click and open this up. And this is not a design session, so I won't spend all my time going through an actual design change. I'll just walk you through what that change looks like from a revision standpoint. I'll open up this task pane along the right side. And there are different ways to access these commands, but this is the most all-inclusive one area. So I like to teach out of this because you can do everything you need to do inside of SOLIDWORKS and related to data management side of things right from here. Now, one thing I do want to highlight, this maturity state. So this currently is at what's called released state. So it also not only has revision capabilities, it has lifecycle capabilities. When something is in a released state, it's locked down, meaning that I've sent it off to production. If I need to make changes, that needs to be communicated elsewhere. So we need a new revision, and then that needs to be rolled out to the manufacturing floor, for instance. So in this case, I need to lock a file to be able to make changes. If I try, it will block me and say that it can't because it's not in a good maturity state. So that's just kind of a safeguard in terms of not only using good revision practices, but also lifecycle management built into the same tool. So in order for me to make changes to this, I need to create a new revision. And that's just as simple as right-click, new revision, or coming down here to the lifecycle tab and selecting the command here. Now, just a pro tip, if you're just getting started with these capabilities, this toolbar assumes you know what the icons mean. You can hover over them and see them. But if you'd like to just see what those commands are consistently, you can right-click and select Show Labels, and it will give you the names of those commands so that as you get familiar, you don't have to go and hover over each one to try and go and find that. Now, I'll go ahead and right-click, select New Revision. And what that will do is it will bring up this prompt window or the dialog window where it will give me a preview of what that next revision is, and then it will give me the opportunity to add a revision comment if I'd like. This is going to be the revision comment applied to this, in this case, revision B, the next one. I don't have to apply a revision comment now. I can add that at any point. So if you don't exactly know what changes you're going to be making, you can hold off and just select Revise. When you go through and select Revise, instead of it doing File, Save As, and creating a new file, this is a database system, not a file-based system. So it is creating a new piece of data, and it's holding on to the old history. It's not overwriting this, but you're not having that, it's the same file. So you're not having that file referencing issue where it's underscore rev A, underscore rev B. So now you can see here, this revision now shows B.1 instead of A.1. And we have this green key here, which means I have it locked to my user. I have edit access to this currently. Now, this is where I would go in and start making model changes. I could make the design changes. Ultimately, I already have a copy of this that I've made some design changes to. If I right select this, I can select replace content. What that command does is it will allow me to find a different SOLIDWORKS file, and it just swaps out the geometry of them. So ultimately, what you would normally see me here doing is going and making the design changes. I've already done that, so I can just highlight this one here, which I've already made the changes to, and select Open to skip that process. And so now we've made our design changes. Now it's a matter of saving those changes to 3D Experience. That's just a matter of right-clicking, and then there's Save with options. I won't get into the nuances, the difference of those two, but I'll just go ahead and save it. If anybody has used any other data management, this is essentially like checking it in. So you can save locally as much as you want, and it's kind of saving to your cache as you're working, but this is essentially a check-in where I'm committing this change to the data management system. So everybody else now has access to this immediately. So now we have this green status symbol. What I've done is I've just written those model changes to this revision specifically. Revision A was left untouched, and we'll touch on that in a moment of how you can go back in your history and view the history of revision A as well. And just as good practice, I'm done working on it, so I'll go ahead and unlock this as well, which means now anybody else on my team can go and lock that and make changes as well. If somebody else was to open it while it was locked, it would show a red padlock. They'd be able to hover over it, and they'd be able to see who is working on it currently. So that's how you it's a very simple process for creating the revision. Now let's take that one layer higher. If I've made a change and I've pulled revision B into my cache, and it looks like I have a couple of mating issues, which, little plug for auto repair, look at that, boom. When it comes to the change in the assembly, since I changed a part within the assembly has therefore changed as well. So if I open up this task pane, we can see that the assembly now has this orange floppy disk symbol. What that's saying is what is on the cloud storage as the latest and what is on my computer is not the same. I now have something updated after the latest save to the cloud storage. So what that means is I have to save this so that that change rolls up to the assembly as well. However, this is also released. So you have to carry that. Basically, in terms of any change, you have to go through every parent above it, and that change will continue to roll up until you get to the top level parent and all the drawings as well. So it's the same process with an assembly. If I can right-click and select Reload from Server, which just basically goes to the cloud storage, finds what is the latest, and it pulls it down to my local. If I was to do that, it would pull revision A of this part back in, because the last assembly that was saved referenced revision A of this part, not revision B. I've just pulled revision B into my cache. So again, only one can be cached at a time, so it swaps it out automatically in SOLIDWORKS. This is triggering SOLIDWORKS to recognize that there's been a change, and in order for me to save that, I need to carry out that same process at the assembly level. So I can just select new revision and then carry out that same process. And you don't have to lose the changes that you made. It will keep the changes that you have locally. It will create that next revision. And all I have to do now is just, again, save. So then you can carry that out with any number of components. You can do multiple components at the same time. So if you're going to be revising 5 different components, you can control select, shift select, and carry out that operation to multiple components at the same time. So I'll go ahead and unlock this. And I'll go ahead and jump back to PowerPoint here. So now on the browser side of things, the web portal, as you go in, you can carry out you can get the same outcome, just in a different way. You don't even have to have SOLIDWORKS open to be able to carry out those operations. So that means, especially since this is a web portal, you could be anywhere on any device, iPad, phone, computer. As long as you have an internet connection, you can jump on and manage the revision and lifecycle of the components. Just wouldn't be able to actually edit the model unless you had SOLIDWORKS, of course. So there's a couple of different ways. Collaborative Lifecycle app is your kind of all-in-one place for lifecycle revision capabilities, and opening a part within that application will allow you to take all of the actions that I just showed in SOLIDWORKS. Alternatively, Bookmark Editor is kind of like the file explorer of the platform. These commands are embedded into that as well, so that you can have kind of a one-stop shop as you're navigating for files. You can carry out these operations there as well. Just a couple of notes on this side of things. If you do create a revision of a part and you would like to have that reference updated in the assembly, that has to be carried out in SOLIDWORKS. So in this example, I created the revision of that crank, but it automatically replaced it in the assembly, and then I had to save the assembly. That's just because I had SOLIDWORKS open and it had the reference and only one could be cached. If I created the new revision of the crank on the web portal, the old assembly you'd have to open up that assembly and know that you have to increase the revision of it to pull the reference, updated revision of that crank into it. And then if you have something in a folder, it's revision specific. So if you have something in a folder and you want it to always have the latest, as of today, you do have to manually tell the folder to pull the latest in. There has been feedback requesting that you can have an option to just be able to have it dynamically up to date to latest, but today that is a manual thing. And if you open the older revision from the bookmark into SOLIDWORKS, it will just go back to that old revision in SOLIDWORKS, of course. So here we have the web portal. And this, if we look up in the top left, we can see what application I'm working out of at any point. And this is Bookmark Editor, essentially our folder structure. And you can see I have all of my parts and assemblies listed here. And then I have a couple of other tabs. I have what's called Product Explorer. That's kind of like a large design review mode, almost equivalent of SOLIDWORKS. I'm able to open up the parts and assemblies and see the assembly structure without actually making any edits to it. But then it allows me to navigate the product structure without having to have SOLIDWORKS, or without having to open a large assembly is another use case where that's really beneficial. And then we have Lifecycle, Collaborative Lifecycle. And this is where, if I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what a part's history is or carry out some revision commands, I can use this application as well. I've built this onto a dashboard where I've saved these in this specific flow, but you can configure this in whichever flow you find best fit for your project. So in order of showing how this works, I can just click and drag as if that's File Explorer and drop them into other applications, or I can click Open and search for it. There's a number of different ways. But like I was saying, this application kind of functions like a design review mode type thing, where I can not only see a preview of the model, I can see the assembly tree as it's built in SOLIDWORKS. And even if I click, it's cross-highlighting as well. So for people that are not tightly integrated with the actual designing of it, they might not be as familiar with the product structure. This is a great visual tool where they can come over here and say, okay, what part is this? highlights over here. Okay, so this is the part that I'm looking to make some changes on, make a revision to. And then again, I can just take that over and drop that into the Collaborative Lifecycle app. And that now opens here where I can see not only the commands, but I can see the history as well. So I can see that I created revision B already. So I can see revision B and A, what state they're each at, and modify the maturity state, release files, but then you have that same command here where you can just go and select a new revision from here. Alternatively, like I said, you can also do it from the folder. So if you're in a bookmark folder, you can click to highlight, and then go up here to the top toolbar and access the new revision command here. So very same workflow, just different ways you can access it, which are useful in their own light. One other note that I did want to mention, not only is a bookmark revision specific, searches are revision specific. So if you're carrying out a search for a part number, depending on how you have your settings of that search set up, you can have it set to show all revisions that exist or just the latest. So with a search, you can configure it to only show the latest if you'd like. In terms of revision history, we've got a preview of this just now, but inside of SOLIDWORKS, you can always view the revision history of something just by going and opening that task pane, clicking on it to highlight it, and then going into that lifecycle tab of the toolbar at the bottom and selecting the revisions command. And then in the browser, there's a couple of different places that you can go. Just opening it in the Collaborative Lifecycle app inherently shows that history, and you can see when new revisions were created and at which state they're each at. And then you can, of course, also in Bookmark Editor, select the revisions command. So starting off in SOLIDWORKS, let's say that I want to see the revision history of this. Again, I can highlight it, and then I can come down to this bottom toolbar, and I can select this revisions command, and it will show me the history. And then as we get into branches and iterations, this can also show different branches and where it branched off into different design concepts and things and merged back into the main design tree. And then again, alternatively, like we can do anything in SOLIDWORKS, we can also do it in the web browser other than change the model itself. We select this drop down and select revisions. And then, like I said, the Collaborative Lifecycle just inherently just shows that history. You can see that visual here as soon as you open something in Collaborative Lifecycle. So generally, how I recommend working is, I generally work out of SOLIDWORKS. If you're a SOLIDWORKS designer, that's going to be the most streamlined way to work unless you're away from SOLIDWORKS or don't want to launch SOLIDWORKS. So working out of that task pane will be your #1 place to go. If you were teaching anybody that's not going to be consistently in SOLIDWORKS but interacting, I would generally work out of the bookmark editor unless you're getting into some very high consistency editing. You're going to be doing a lot of operations on increasing life cycles. Then the Collaborative Lifecycle as a standalone application makes sense. But otherwise, if you're just doing a quick new revision, using that command in the bookmark editor will be the most natural. Now, in terms, we've talked about parts, assemblies. How does this affect drawings? Because there is still, of course, a need for 3D drawings. And I'll just jump right to the demonstration for this one. If I go ahead and open up the drawing here, the main thing that I want to highlight, it looks like it lost the reference because I swapped out the geometry, so I'll just reattach this balloon. The main thing I want to highlight is the revision of the drawing is unique. The drawing has its own revision regardless of which revision the part or assembly that is referenced on the drawing has. Some people operate fine with this, other people want it to always be the same. If it's revision C of the drawing, it should be revision C of the assembly on the drawing. As of today, that you just have to, if you're going to want that, if you have that requirement, you just have to make sure to revise them both at the same time. So you can keep them aligned, but it's just a manual approach to keeping them aligned as of today. So that was really the main thing that I wanted to touch on in terms of drawings. Now, with that, how your company defines what is shown in the revision block is up to you. You can, of course, still, on the drawing sheet itself, link the revision of the part or assembly as a visual here. So you could have your own section for the document revision and the actual model revision and have those shown. Whereas in the PLM system, it does have its own revision and has to be managed individually. So next up, revision tables. So in terms of revision tables, if you go into your system options and then you go over to your document properties tab, drop down tables and select revision, there is a section in there for 3D experience driven revision table. So typically you could always add a revision table in SOLIDWORKS, and ultimately the goal of the revision table is to document what change has been made on the drawing, and you can see that history. Very manual, like you add that new row for new revision, then you can add your clouds around what's changed, you can add your revision stamps, etc. The 3D experience driven revision table just streamlines that and increases alignment with a system driving the change rather than somebody having to follow a process and do it right. As soon as a revision is created, it creates that new row for you. And then if you add a revision comment, it pulls that revision comment in for you. It keeps track of who did the revision automatically, what date the revision was created. All of that's carried on by the system without somebody having to manually enter it. A couple of notes. It will only appear once something is saved to 3D Experience. So if you've just got a drawing that you started and you have not yet checked it in for the first time, it won't have a row because it doesn't have a revision yet because it's not been recognized in the system. I know some people will troubleshoot that. It's like, why can't I get this row? It's like, you haven't saved it yet. So you need that initial revision for it to show up. And then again, how it has its own revision. The revision of the drawing is what's referenced in the revision table, not the revision of the model. So you could be on revision F of the model, but if your drawing is at revision B, that's what your revision table is going to show, the revision of the drawing file itself. So if you want those to be aligned, you have to revise both at the same time. So from this drawing here, if I go into, I can click on the gear icon or select Tools, Options, Document Properties, Tables, and Revision. And here we see 3D Experience Driven Revision Table. Now, when I select this, Document Properties is specific to this file. So if I didn't previously have 3D Experience Driven Revision Table in my template, and it was using the SOLIDWORKS Revision Table, the next file I use from that old template will go right back to SOLIDWORKS Revision Table. So if you decide you want to move forward with 3D Experience Revision Table, you have to make that change and then save over the template you're using for drawings so that each new drawing goes through and uses that setting moving forward. A couple of additional customizations you can make. Visible row count. If you get into, you've got numerical revisions and you're on to revision 15, do you want all of them shown or do you just want 4 of the latest shown? So that gives you guidance on how much you can customize of your latest revisions, how many of those rows are shown. And then the other option here is always show first revision. So regardless of how many, maybe I'm at 15, I always want to see the first one and then 3 other ones, for example. Once that is set, when I go into my annotation tab and then select tables and then go into revision table, you'll see, and it should pull it. If it's not, there's probably a file location that's not linked correctly, but there should be a default template included with the installation. And this is not one that I customized at all. Standard 3D Experience revision block is the default template it should pull. Or if you've gone and customized one, you could have that entered as well. So I can just select OK. And it's going to go through and look, I've already saved this part in, and it looks like I had it anchored. I'll pull it over here, and I'll pull that in a little bit. So we can see it pulled in this information automatically for me. I didn't have to go through and enter any of this because it's pulling it from the PLM system. Instead of having to go through and manually enter that I was the one that revised it, it was able to pull that in. And again, the assembly is at revision B, but it's only showing revision A here because I have not yet revised the drawing file itself. So in order to highlight that, before doing that, in terms of customizations, if I go through and click on the column header, it is limited to these properties. So you can delete or add columns, but it would be limited to these dynamic properties. You can add rows if you want to have custom fields that you manually type in alongside of this, but these are the dynamic fields that it will pull from the PLM system as options. The default template has all of them, so you can remove which columns that you don't need and save that off as a new template file, so the next time you pull it in, it has exactly what you want to see. So to highlight this functionality, if I come in here, and now technically this drawing has changed because the revision of the assembly on it has also changed because of the caching behavior we've discussed. So what I have to do is carry out that same workflow we carried out the assembly earlier and create this. And we'll go through and create that revision. We see it's not the latest right now, but it's creating that in the background, and then it pulls it into my current session. So what it does is it creates the revision in the background, and then it pulls it into my current session. So now we can see that it populated this row without me having to go and do that when I created the revision manually. We can see it pulled in the comment. We can see it pulled in the creation date. We can see it pulled in my name. So it pulled in all of that information automatically when it was created from the properties of the data management system. So while I have this open, I actually skipped over one part of the viewing revision history that I'm going to circle back to. What if you want to not only view like when it was created, what if you need to get back to that older geometry for any reason? Somebody has questions about an older revision. Would it fit this use case, et cetera? In SOLIDWORKS, I can right-click on something, and there's this replace by revision command. So not only can you use the revision commands to find the revision, I can use replace by revision, and it's defaulted to selecting the other one because I only have two. So I can select OK. And what that will do is it will snap back to that previous geometry that was at that release state. Same thing for assemblies. And again, I mentioned with assemblies, if you have a revision of a part that was different in one assembly revision to another, it'll pull all of the respective components back to the state they were at when that revision of the assembly was released. Same thing with drawings. So it all kind of filters up parts to assemblies to the drawings is the hierarchy. And you have a visual indicator here in SOLIDWORKS is last revision. If that's a red X, that's telling you that not necessarily that it's wrong, it's just you should know that this is not the latest revision that exists in the system. So that's a matter of how your organization carries out old revisions. Do you have multiple revisions in operation at the same time, or do you obsolete revisions once you move from one to the next? And then there is also a replace by latest as well. And then there's also an update revisions command, which would be a little bit more of an advanced session, but if you're getting into assemblies where you're kind of strategically swapping out certain types of components to the latest revision, that command is used for that use case. Awesome. All right. So this is the revisions versus branches versus iterations that I wanted to touch on. So wanted to start with some conceptual, and then we'll dive in and get a visual on this. But revisions, ultimately, when am I using a revision? Downstream users should know which version is approved or trusted, whether it's for purchasing, whether it's for manufacturing, whether it's for reuse in another design. And it's going to represent a change. Maybe you have minor revisions that are representing a milestone in the design that you want to have locked in and a historical reference to, traceability to. And you just need that formally identified, this revision is at this life cycle state. And iteration is more in line, if anybody's used PDM, more in line with a version. It's just as you're checking things in, you don't necessarily need to change the revision letter for this, but you want to have the ability to roll back to it if you realize that you've done this experimental design change and it's really not in the direction that you should go. That's where your iterations come into use. So from a workflow standpoint, and it was within this last year that this was actually even introduced to the SOLIDWORKS world. On 3D Experience in general, it's been around for some time, but to the SOLIDWORKS world within this last year, it was introduced. So there's still some changes that may come in the future, as with any new capability that's added, but it's pretty straightforward functionality. If I was to make a change to this, so for example, I'll just do a Control Q, which force force rebuild this component essentially. I didn't actually change any geometry, but it flags it that something has changed, and that something is the last modified date. So technically something's changed. It allows me to save to the platform. Note that it's flagging me here that I haven't locked it, so this is just good practice. If you're ever making changes, go ahead and lock it so that people aren't overriding what you're working on as well. And then this is where that save with options comes in. So if I want to keep an iteration as of today, it's not automatic as it is with PDM. It is a intentional, I want this iteration to be saved. In that save with options, I have this keep previous iteration, and then I can also leave an iteration comment similar to a revision comment if I'd like. So I call this sample iteration. And then it will go through and it will save it. Where it was at prior will be maintained. It won't just be overriding consistently, and I have the ability to roll back by opening this task pane, selecting this, and selecting this iterations command. And I can see here that history, and I can always just, similarly to how I showed with revisions, select on which iteration I want to roll back to, and select replace content, and it will pull that state of that part into your session. Now, something worth noting with iterations is it does not work in the same way that assemblies do in terms of which iteration of the part within this assembly was used. It will just remember, was this part there? Was it mated? So if you have changes in assembly that you would like to save, that's probably a better use case for having a major minor revision scheme where you do a .1, .2, .3, and that will remember every reference. Whereas iterations is better used on the part level. I can roll that part back. Drawings have the similar issue. It's not going to remember which iteration of the part was used for that iteration of the drawing. It just remembers what changes have I made on the drawing for this iteration. Did I add a note? Did I add a view? And then it will pull whichever latest iteration of the part via that drawing it is used. It will remember which revision of a part on the drawing, just not which iteration of a part. So in terms of branches, that's more, revision stays the same use case. In terms of branches, are you going down a path where you're doing kind of an exploratory concept A, concept B, concept C, and I want to then decide which path I want to go down, and then I can merge that back in if I want, or I want to branch off into a totally different direction and have the traceability back that this product originally started here and has branched over time. So those are a couple of use cases in which branches are really powerful, rather than just using a save as, and then you've completely lost traceability of where this came from. So if we jump back into SOLIDWORKS from a branching perspective, they function a lot more like revisions. If I select and highlight this, I can go through and then select, I always get mixed up here even with this one, they're flipped around. There's new branch, there's new branch from, or new revision from. New branch creates the branch, new revision from merges that back into the main tree if you so choose. So with new branch, very similar process to creating a revision. And what it will do is it actually will start something at a fresh revision A or 0 or 1 or whatever the first in your revision scheme is. And you can even give it a new title. And I can give it a comment as well. So when I go through and branch this does not function like revisions where if I create a new revision, it assumes I want that pulled into my session automatically. And just if I'm at revision A and I create a new revision, it will pull revision B into my session automatically. Branches do not function like that. It just creates the branch in the background. If you actually want to work on the branch, we use that replace revision command, replace by revision command. So if I go to that same command, I can see it branched off here. So it gives you a visual of the path that that design has taken. And if I want to load that into my session, I can click on this and select OK, and it will do the same thing where it will load that in. I can make changes, and any changes I'm making are now completely disconnected from my main design tree, and I can concept, experiment, and then if I want to have that new branch merge back in to be the starting point for revision C, I can do that as well. So that probably could be a session of its own, but that's just really the use case of those different tools, revision, iteration, and branch. So I broke these into different sections. Whenever it comes to, this is administrator only, so you need to have administrator capabilities to do this. In any of these changes, it's actually in the browser side of things. If you go to your apps and search for Collaborative Spaces Control Center, this is the app that you would make those changes in. Along the right side, the categories I'm talking about are in this list, and then I'll show you the settings themselves. But the revision naming rules category of those settings, two main categories that I would look to change this with. Ultimately, what this page does is it allows you to choose which revision scheme do I want to use for that type of data. And there's two main sections that I would configure. You have your document release, so that's going to be your non-CAD documents, your PDFs, your Word docs, Excel, anything that's non-CAD, you can manage in this platform as well. And then you have your physical product, drawing, and more. That's any CAD, 2D drawing, part, assembly, that scheme goes across all of those. So in terms of actually configuring it, it's just selecting which of these options do you want from a dropdown. You can ultimately customize that, which we'll get into here in a moment, but it comes in with some industry standard options. And this will apply to any new data being saved after the change. So if you already have, let's say you started with a 012 scheme, you saved some data, that will always be in the numerical. If you change it to alphabetical, new data will take on that alphabetical scheme moving forward. Now, if we go one tab over in that same section, there's extended revision sequences. So this is if you want to create your own custom scheme. I want to skip these numbers for whatever reason, or you want to create a completely customized scheme, you can do so. All you have to do for this is you select download. It will download a JSON file. You add in some code on how you want that customized. Again, that probably could be a session of its own, but you upload that and then it rolls out moving forward. Well, it adds it as an option to that dropdown. Then you have to go to the dropdown and select it as your option moving forward. This is just some examples. I won't spend too much time on this, and I can send over this QR code if you need. But this is just some examples of what that code looks like that you would put in that JSON file. That would allow you to create those different customized examples. Then the last tab on this section, if anybody is using a revision scheme for their pre-production versus a different revision scheme once they move to post-production, that can be achieved through this area here. Ultimately, you choose in your system settings what you want it to start as in terms of pre-production, and then a similar process, exact same process. Here's an example of that code, but basically you just say, which scheme do I want to switch it to? And I didn't touch on the change management capabilities, but there are change management when you get into formal change. You have to use formal change in order to trigger the switch. That's the trigger. You're not using formal change until that initial formal release, and that triggers it to switch over to that other revision scheme. Then we have our lifecycle and collaboration tab. This is where you go if you want to have a secondary, so .1, .2, .3. So that revision format, if you want a primary and secondary, you can have that option there. If you want to do the same for documents, non-CAD documents, in other words, you can. And then classical minor revisions, that's tricky. It's not for SOLIDWORKS data, so ignore that one. Leave that one as disable, more as a disclaimer. And just for everybody's awareness on if you do want, I had .1, .2, I had the secondary. How that works is if the part is not yet released and you increase the revision while it's in work, it will bump the minor revision up to the next. And then as soon as you release it and bump the revision, it bumps the major and resets the minor. If you change whether you have primary or just primary and secondary, after you have data on the platform, that will change existing data the next time you revise it. So if you did not have primary and secondary and then you turn that on later, the next time you go to revise something, it will throw on the .1. So that does change existing data after the next time you revise it. And then I believe this might be the last one here. Permission rules, if you want to modify and set guidelines of, I do not want any previous revisions in an in-work state if I'm creating a new revision, just to make sure everything's released. That top one, you want to make sure that you have it in work, draft, in work, and frozen set there. And then if you want to make sure that you're just making sure that the latest revision is not in work, then you can set draft, in work, frozen for that one too. Or actually, it's the inverse for that one. That one you set what you want to be able to create it from. So you would set just released for that example. So that allows you to have a little bit of control, make sure you have good practice and people are not creating revisions on in-work data if you don't want them to.